Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Thank you. I now have the pleasure of introducing someone who is no stranger to any of you in this room. Our next speaker is a strong and visible ally to the LGBTQ community in our fight for full federal equality. During his 8 years as Vice President of the United States, during those 8 years, he served as a champion for LGBTQ Americans and people all across the globe, often when we needed it the most. We will never forget his bold declaration of support for marriage equality at that pivotal moment in 2012. It was a critical moment in history which helped to change hearts and minds throughout this nation. Or when he called the fight for transgender equality the civil rights issue of our time. Over the past 2 years, as a private citizen, he and Dr. Jill Biden have continued to tackle issues of equality with the passion they're famous for, from helping to shine a spotlight on the detention, torture, and murder of LGBTQ people in Chechnya, to launching an initiative to support LGBTQ youth and communities right here at home. And today, he's bringing that same determination to his race for the White House. We are so lucky to have him here with us in Columbus, Ohio tonight. So please join me in welcoming our friend and champion, the 47th Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Thank you so very, very much. I love you guys. You're changing the world, not just the United States. Look, folks, my name is Joe Biden. I am Jill Biden's husband and a friend of Chad's. And I go wherever he asks me to show up. Folks, as they used to say in the Senate, if you excuse a point of personal privilege, I think that I've worked with Chad since he's headed this organization, actually a little before that. And I think he has done a truly, truly, truly remarkable job. And what a wonderful day and a wonderful way to start off the month of Pride. But let me, before I begin, actually thank you. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Those of you who know me, and a fair number of you do. I thank you for my children, my grandchildren, and all the kids that I see every day on campus as a professor at Penn, and all those folks out there who are, you've done as much for straight folks as you have gay folks and lesbian folks. No. You know, when Chad and others give me more credit for coming out on television in 2012 on Meet the Press, I had told the president that I wasn't going to push things because that wasn't where we were yet, but if asked, I was not going to remain quiet. And Mr. Mayor and all the Ohio representatives, including Elizabeth Brown, the daughter of a great United States Senator, Sherrod Brown, who are here at the Human Rights Campaign. As you may remember, I caught a little bit of grief for saying that. You were awesome. Well, no. I was raised by a man who was awesome. By a man who was awesome. I've told the story and I'm going to tell it again. I was a high school kid trying to get a job as a lifeguard in the east side of Wilmington in the projects, the largest city swimming pool, because I was involved with, as a kid, trying to get involved in the civil rights movement. And I was the only white employee in the east side for a while. And I stopped off to pick up an application in what they call Rodney Square, the corporate center of America at the time. I was getting out of the car to go into the courthouse to get my application. My dad dropped me off, and there were two men, well-dressed men, standing in the corner. And they kissed. We were stopped at the light. They kissed, and one walked to the Hercules building. It used to be the big company there. And the DuPont, other went to the DuPont building. He just turned and looked at my dad. And he said something simple and profound. He said, "Joey, it's simple. They love each other." Simple. They love each other. Not a joke. But the truth of the matter is, so many of you, particularly those of you who are a little older, had given so much, taken such risks, done so much to change the attitude of Americans. People are afraid of what they don't know. And as you came out and more came out, they realized, that's my cousin. That's my brother's friend. That's my neighbor. That's the folk I play ball with. That's the person in my study group. They're just like me. They're just like me. And all the stereotypical notions began to erode and fade. Because the American people, I get credit for saying something that took any courage. First of all, my father come down from heaven if I didn't do what I did. But the second reason, all kidding aside, was a lot of people, as you may remember, not the president, but a lot of other people thought I had just committed this gigantic blunder. I told the president, if asked, I was not going to be quiet. And the next day, when I walked in on Monday, all this recrimination was supposed to happen. And he got up from behind the desk, just came over, gave me a big hug, and he said, "Well, you told me." And you're right. But here's the deal. I just want to know, I want you to know that I knew what you had already done. More than 50% of the American people already support it. Already, because of what you've done. Nothing I did. Already supported marriage equality. They already had done that. They'd moved beyond because of the sacrifices you made. And the more and more the people that come out, the more people realize, wait a minute. All those ridiculous stereotypical notions about how we're different. We're all the children of God. All of us. Everyone. No, I don't say it for applause, but that's what happened. That's what happened. And if you notice, not because of me, I just happen to be a high-profile person who said, others have said it as well at the time. But folks, things began to change because you had already changed them. I can remember, you know, if 6, 7, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, in Columbus or Washington or New York, there was a business meeting, and a gay waiter came up and talked a little bit with a little bit of a lisp or something. It came out and it came off as being effeminate. And someone at the table made fun and said, "Well, let me tell you what I'd like," and made fun of him. No one would have said anything. This is what I mean, how you freed so many non-homophobic straight guys and women. Today, if that happened at a table, you know what happened? That SOB never get invited back again. No. No, I really mean it. Not a joke. The disapprobation of society be swift and real. And folks, there's nothing that can change what you've started. Many of you paid a personal price for being who you are. You risked your jobs. You risked your livelihoods. Many earlier risked, and still today someplace, risked their physical well-being. I remember a young transgender started off working for him as a transgender man, turned out to be transgender, worked for my son as Attorney General. She's become fairly famous now because she's led the effort on transgender efforts. My son Bo immediately embraced her and immediately changed the law in the state of Delaware protecting transgender people. So folks, look, but in too many places, you're still at risk for your jobs. You can get married because the Supreme Court now says that, which is long overdue. But you can walk in after being married and walk into your place of employment in so many states and be fired. It's got to change. It's got, no, it's beyond, not just it has to change for your personal rights. It's got to change because of the values we have to demonstrate to the rest of the world. You know, it's got to change because it's just morally wrong. Your tenacity, your integrity, you bent the moral arc in this nation toward justice. And thanks to you, our children and grandchildren are growing up in a world that is far more just, far more open-minded, far more humane. But here's the hard truth. For all the hard-won progress you have made, for as much as we can celebrate how much better things have gotten, this fight, as you know, is not nearly over. And I'm not just saying that to you because I'm here before you. I say that in private. I say that when I was vice president. I say that across the board. So much is at stake. And we have to come together, you already there, to finish this work because it is the civil rights issue of our time, as I've been saying for the last. And that's how I got involved initially in the civil rights movement. But this is the civil rights issue of our time. If this fails, think of all else that fails. Really, think about it. They have a profound effect on who we are as a people. And just like with racial justice and women's rights, we're seeing pushback against all the progress we've made toward equality. Progress you've worked so hard for decades to work for. From the early trailblazers like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera and Harvey Milk. And I know we say that, but I mean, these people were risking their lives. Not just their jobs, their lives. It took courage. A courage that exceeds just taking a chance of losing something. They risked their lives. To all the loving couples who fought for our freedom to marry. You know, when I met with Jim, on the day that his case won in the Supreme Court, I called a couple of my friends who are deeply involved in the issue. They were on the steps of the court. And I've never, ever remember hearing as many people so genuinely happy and relieved. You know, to all of you who live every day with pride, coming out, telling your stories, demanding to be treated with dignity you deserve, we refuse to allow what's happening now to be pushed back, to be snatched back. You know, I indicated when I announced, and this is not, I'm almost hesitant to say it because I'd be here if I weren't running for president. And you know that. But I announced, one of the reasons I decided I had to is when I watched what happened in Charlottesville. I watched those people literally coming out of the fields and out from under rocks carrying torches, Nazi flags, singing the same anti-Semitic bile and chants, the same exact language used in Nuremberg, in Berlin, and throughout Germany in the 30s, accompanied by white supremacists and the Ku Klux Klan, and battle against these incredible forces of intolerance we fought throughout history, and confronted by decent, honorable people who said, no hate. And a conflict occurred, and a young woman lost her life. And what did the president say when he was asked about it? He said they're very fine people. In both, it was shame. Very fine people in both groups. Folks, no sitting president, Republican or Democrat, has ever uttered a phrase like that. A sitting president. Never, never. So this is about what you're doing. It's about a battle to preserve the values written into our founding documents. Sounds corny to talk about our founding documents, that all human beings are created equal. They're endowed with certain inalienable rights. We've never lived up. We have never fully lived up to that promise, but we've never fully abandoned it before. And we can't turn back on it now, for God's sake. And yet, in this dangerous moment for our nation, the very idea of America is at stake. America's an idea. America's an idea. It's bigger than any ocean. It's more powerful than any dictator. It's more profound than anything. It's an idea that says that we are about providing everybody who's here and access to it with dignity and respect. And you know, it's beneath the leadership we have in the White House. They're on the wrong side of history. Folks, Chad kids me because I'm always quoting Irish poets, and I might add, the Irish Catholic Republic of Ireland passed a constitutional amendment saying gay, lesbian marriage is appropriate. Get it straight. Get it straight. Okay? I don't want to hear it. Only country has passed a constitutional amendment by referenda for doing it. So, folks, but here's the deal. You know, they always kid me that I'm always quoting Irish poets. Well, they think it's because I'm Irish. It's not the reason. I quote them because they're simply the best poets in the world. Now, here's the deal. There's a poem by a guy that I got an opportunity to get anyway. He recently passed. And he wrote a poem called The Cure at Troy. And there's a stanza in the poem that I think tells us where we are at this moment in the human rights campaign. He says, and he was talking about a different issue, but it more applies to today and us than I think it did as Ireland in 1917 when the first rising occurred. He said, all's changed utterly. A terrible beauty has been born. But then he was followed by a guy named Seamus Heaney. Actually, Heaney wrote the Cure at Troy. And the second piece was by Heaney recently. He just passed away. And he said, history teaches us not to hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, that longed-for tidal wave of justice rises up, and hope and history rhyme. I, honest to God, believe that's where we are in the issue of human rights campaign here in the United States. We have a chance to fundamentally alter it. Instead of using the full might of the executive branch to ensure justice, dignity, safety for all, this president, this White House has literally a bully pulpit, is callously extending his power over the most vulnerable, implementing discriminatory policies like Muslim bans, turning away asylum seekers, putting children in cages. And the current vice president uses religious freedom as an excuse to license discrimination across broadly areas and denying LGBTQ Americans their basic rights. It's wrong and it is immoral what they're doing. Look. But we see all this rhetoric clearly for what it is, another way to drive a wedge between us, among us, a way to minimize the humanity of others. And that's not what this country is about. We can't let this become the American stand in the world. We have to stand up to our shared values, come together as a nation, not exploit our differences in political games, but bring us together. Just look at how much damage has been done in the past 2 weeks. The Department of Health and Human Services proposes new regulations that would gut non-discrimination provisions for LGBTQ individuals that were written into the Affordable Care Act of our administration. They've written it in now. They're written in and they want to just ignore it. HHS has also finalized a denial of care rule that will allow almost everyone involved in patient care, from the board of directors to recipients to receptionists in charge of scheduling, to put their beliefs above LGBTQ patients' health. No, that's what they're doing. The Department of Housing and Urban Development announced plans to allow homeless shelters to turn away transgender people. I mean, well, look, this is beyond the scope of anything remotely what we've seen before. And it's been reported the administration is denying birthright citizenship to children of same-sex couples and may soon make it easier for adoption agencies to reject same-sex couples. Look, the latest in a long list of repressive moves targeting the sick, the homeless, the children, housing rules that are particularly egregious for so many LGBTQ youth rejected by their families, relying on shelters for survival. Maybe some of you were in that position when you were young. When a transgender American is literally under attack all across the nation, particularly, as was pointed out by Chad, transgender women of color denying access to life-saving health care, shelters, social services. Well, it's only going to further the cycle of violence and abuse. We've already had 5, just this year, 5 black transgender women killed violently in 2019. It's outrageous. It must end. And the fastest way to end it is end the Trump administration. Because, folks, it's not only been, the Trump administration has not only been a disaster for human rights at home, but around the world. Just look at the ugliness. The anti-LGBTQ actions taken by this administration, challenges to the right to marry, barring transgender service members, removing Title IX protection for trans students. 28 states, as you know, you can still be fired for being gay, 30 states for being transgender. That's why we need the Equality Act that just passed the House, with a bipartisan support, I might add. In 2018, I endorsed over 120 candidates, campaigned for 68 of them. I believe that's the exact number. And folks, we elected 41 folks who didn't have to be radical about anything. They beat Republicans in districts. They went out and they beat them in districts, and they talked about basic fundamental rights. And you supported them, and the community came out. You know, that's the difference in electing a Democratic House makes. Now we need to elect a Democratic Senate that will pass it. And I'm sure I'm no different than anyone else, but I promise you, if I'm elected president, that'll be the first thing I ask to be done. Because it will send a message around the world, not just at home. Here in Ohio, there are some protections for LGBTQ individuals at the city level, Mr. Mayor, thank you, and for the state employees, and they're important. But it's not nearly enough. Ohio has to pass the Ohio Fairness Act. And I want to particularly recognize Senator Nikki Antonio for her work in the House and now in the state Senate. Guaranteeing every person living in Ohio knows that they are safe and can live their lives without fear and discrimination when they go to work, when they try to rent an apartment, or when a trans woman testifies recently in the Ohio State Senate, she said, when seeking to buy a wedding dress. My God. You know, it's not only morally sound policy from that standpoint, it's also smart economics. Look at what the chamber is doing. Look at what the business community is doing. Guess what? They figured it out. They got it. They got it. You've already changed the environment in such a fundamental way. If I told you 10 years ago that you're going to have major corporations saying, by the way, I ain't doing it if you have rules that don't protect LGBTQ community. I spoke at the United Nations. I met with all these, when I was vice president, met with all these companies that work internationally. It's around the world. You know, and think of the message it would send to the young people of Ohio. You're seen. You're wanted. Because there are still so many young people here in Ohio and all across America struggling to picture a future for themselves. And I bet all of you went through it too. Where do I fit? Where will I be safe? How will I be affirmed? Are they going to love me? The worry of being rejected by their families and communities, kicked out of their homes, subject to vile practice of conversion therapy. That's why the Biden Foundation created an initiative called As You Are, promoting understanding and acceptance for the safety of LGBTQ youth. Look, all of you know, this is not just a matter of what's right. This is literally a matter of life and death for so many young people. A 2017 study found that 47% of LGBTQ youth had considered suicide and 23% attempted it. I don't have to tell you how hard it is for these kids, because many of you were these kids. You remember the sleepless nights, the terror in your heart when you first spoke your truth. Coach, I'm gay. Mom, I'm transgender. Not knowing, not having any idea for certain how the loved one might respond. Even today, how many of you still look down the street who's watching before you give your partner steal a kiss from them? I suspect many of you have become strong and as resilient as you are today with the support of those who offered help along the way. Sounds silly, but the teacher who looked out for you in the classroom, the coach who said, no, you're on my team, the relative or neighbor who stood up for you when others didn't, the faith leader who reminded you that we're all born and created in God's image, the chosen family who filled the void when your biological family wasn't there with uncommon love, acceptance, and support. That's who I believe we are. And that is the soul of America. When I talk about the soul of America, that's part of the soul of America. Damn it, that's who we are. That's who we have to be. This is our real moral obligation. These are not somebody else's children. They're all our children. These children are the kite strings that lift our national ambitions aloft. They're all our children. And how we treat them is the measure of what kind of decency and honor we have as a society. There's nothing short of that. That's the America we need to show the world, because make no mistake, the rest of the world looks to the United States to set an example on how to treat historically marginalized populations. They do. And we need to send a clear message directly from the top of our government that prejudice is prejudice and humanity is humanity, period. No cultural reason or excuse. We have to make it clear, as we did in our administration. The United States of America will not stand for it in any countries, and we will not cooperate with those countries who engage in this fratricide that they're moving on. Using religion or culture to discriminate against or demonize LGBTQ individuals is never justified, not anywhere in the world. Violence against any person, any form, is intolerable. And yet around the world, LGBTQ community people face terror and torture, from Chechnya to El Salvador to Malaysia to Tanzania. And even in some of our democratic allies like Romania, we're losing ground to some of the divisive politics we're battling here at home in the Trump administration. That's why it's so important for the rest of us to speak out, make clear how repugnant we find these actions. For example, in Brunei, a new law recently put into effect authorizes the execution by stoning of gay sex and adultery. it was only thanks to the international outcry, notwithstanding this president, and the global pressure that the Sultan pulled back from that position, maintaining a de facto moratorium on the death penalty. Wasn't that so nice of him? He has very little social redeeming value. But that's why we have to speak out. There's power in our voices, and our silence is complicity. Look, this personal and political targeting of the community probably sounds like a recipe for pessimism. And there are some dark realities we cannot look away from or ignore. We have to meet them head on. But I said in Philadelphia a few weeks ago, I know there's times where we have to have a bare-knuckle fight to get things done on issues that matter most, including equality. Yet, notwithstanding it all, I remain optimistic because I believe in who we are as a country. I believe in the story of this country and this community. This month marks 50 years since the Stonewall Uprising. 50 years since those brave individuals, when pushed too far for too long, took a stand on Christopher Street. 50 years, as transgender activist Ms. Major recently put it, we were fighting and it was for our lives. 50 years since the birth of a movement that's delivered so much acceptance and hope and pride in the community. But just 1 year, even just 1 year later, in 1970, we saw Christopher Street Liberation March that planted the seeds of global pride in the movement, Global Pride, which is spread around the world, empowering people to embrace their identity, even in places that are still too dangerous to do so. So it's no wonder that when India's Supreme Court unanimously decided that discrimination against homosexuality last year, they cited several landmark American Supreme Court decisions when they made that decision. Last month, when tens of thousands stood outside in the pouring rain, clutching rainbows and signs to celebrate Taiwan becoming the first Asian country to legalize same-sex marriage. And we remember not so long ago when the White House was lit up in a rainbow pride. So look, there's a lot of hard work left. It took a lot of acting up and organizing, PFLAG moms, developing activists and student leaders, demanding that HIV/AIDS be destigmatized and treated. It took persistence and true courage. All of you here tonight, so many who are not here with us, your courage has given millions of people reason to hope, inspired so many people around the world to be brave. And I promise you, whether I'm elected or not, I'll be back as a private citizen to make sure I stand with you in this fight. It matters to my children. It matters to my granddaughters. We've got to push back. You'll have a real partner, so don't give up. We are just beginning this fight. There's no reason we can't do it all. Thank you. Thank you for Collective Voice. And thank you again, and happy Pride. Remember who you are.